in the form of Dr. Vanas James, and the discussion will be very, very interesting. Good afternoon, Farid. How are you doing, my brother?
Good afternoon, David. It's good to hear your voice.
Yep, always.
I'll be looking forward to today's discussion. How are you doing? You good? All is well with you?
Yeah, man, all is well. I always pray, so I know that the Father is in front, I'm right behind, so I know everything is okay.
Well, same here, and we hope that the same applies to Trinidad and Tobago. All these issues that we have dealing with right now.
I tell you, man, so much.
Yeah. I know that we for our viewers and listeners, we are cutting off today at 5:30.
Yes, we are.
So maybe what we can do, I see Dr. James is standing by in the wings. Maybe we could perhaps have a little preliminary talk with him whilst we await Richard.
Okay, okay.
Dr. James, you're there. If you're hearing us, you could
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you, Farid.
It's really good to hear your voice.
I'm hearing you and I'm seeing you too.
Yeah. If you wish, you can turn on your camera because we do have a Facebook page, so it'll give the viewers an opportunity to see you.
That
Nice. Good to see you.
Nice. Always.
The voice you're hearing in the background is David McIntyre.
David, how are you doing?
I'm okay, Dr. Vanas James. I appreciate every time you come on the program. I listen to you, and I really appreciate your contributions.
Yeah.
We need people like you at the top, Dr. James. Come on the cover and confront.
well, the top is the society, so that I'm in the top. I'm at the top.
I hear you, brother. I hear you. Farid?
Dr. James, Richard will be joining us shortly. He's our main host. I'm just the side show.
Yeah,
but
no problem.
I'll do some warm-up rounds with you, and then when Richard comes, you'll face the full assault of what he has to throw at you.
No problem at all. I understand Richard very well.
Yes. So we're cutting off at 5:30, so we want to appreciate you for the time that you take to spend with us and to share your views and your knowledge. Now, I must say that in preparation for the program, I tend to look at the other programs that you speak on. So I listened to what you said earlier in the week with Brother B in Tobago.
Okay.
Maybe where we could start is this. Right at the salt of the matter. There is no longer a standoff in Tobago between the PDP and its leader, Watson Duke, and the chief sec, Fali Augustine. One newspaper, and I was looking at the headlines, I don't like to put my own views, but one newspaper carried the Trinidad Express. It was clearly stated the divorce is now official. So the media is feeding on what's going on in Tobago. Ansel Dennis had his part to say, and he said that it's a bunch of nowhereans sitting in the current executive. And Watson Duke is saying that the mandate of the PDP, which is people before politics, seems to be dead in the THE at this time. My position is this, and this is my question to you to begin with. Does the current executive of Fali Augustine and others have the moral authority to continue in governance of the THE?
Well, the main moral authority that is needed is the moral authority to set up government in a way that meets the needs of the people of Tobago and the nation, for that matter. That's the main moral authority you need. And to the extent that you understand the substance of that point, I would say the answer is yes. The party in December of last year was given a mandate by the people of Tobago to take on the agenda of reforming both the party itself, the PDP, to set up a democratic arrangement. That's the substance of what it means to say Watson would be the political leader and Fali would be the leader of the government. That could only work if you set up a democratic arrangement. And I promised on their platform to the people of Tobago that we would be able to work that out. So that's one. That wasn't done all the way up to the breakup when Watson was there. And that's after several meetings with Watson. And I could speak as a person who was actively there in the process. After several meetings with Watson to set out what is required for a party to be set up in a way that it could support the governance process, good governance, I laid that out, and fundamentally it amounts to setting up a democratic party, a party in which the membership of the party, through some sort of central committee, would have a mechanism through which it could filter the opinions coming from the constituency to the political leadership and the executive of the party. That wasn't done by Watson, and that would be a mandate. That would still be the obligation of this remaining group of persons who hold control of the executive. That's the first point. And let me say, in response to Ansel Dennis, any group of Tobagonians with the competence to do that is welcome to the table. The PNM proved over 21 years it didn't have the competence to do that. So you can't wash him out on anybody. Now, the second part of the responsibility that this group will have, the moral responsibility to implement, is the responsibility to set up the government in Tobago, notwithstanding the state of the messy THA Act we have in our hands, to set up the government in a way that the people can play an active role in the policy-making process from day to day. As you know, policy in Tobago, as in Trinidad, let me say, is fundamentally made by the executive with the assistance of the public service. The people of the country have no other channels through which they could influence policy. But you need that second channel. The people need, and that's what in the US and in Britain and those places people talk of as public hearings on policy issues. When the public service brings a policy matter to the table, the hearings mechanism must be available in the parliament to call the public in and say, if this is what the government is proposing, even the budget must be subject to this idea. If this is what the government is proposing, what do you think? Is this what you want to go with as a population? And I will say to you that this group, if it has this understanding and the courage, if it moved in both those directions, there is still an opportunity for it to win back the confidence of the people of Tobago that it has lost. If it doesn't have that skill, then the cry for elections will grow and grow. But let me remind you, we've been through this mill since 1980 under Robinson. And look where we are today. Look what we're discussing, because the design of the THA is inadequate to the empowerment of the people of Tobago in a way that allows them to drive their own development. The same is true of the parliament in Trinidad, let me remind you. So it is not enough to simply say they have a moral authority to call an election. Any group you pick would have the same responsibility that I'm talking about. The PNM, for example, is a follow the leader party. And there is no mechanism inside that party by which the population of the membership of the party can control what the executive of the party does. There is no such mechanism at this time. If you saw what happened in Britain in this year, the membership of the Conservative Party removed the Prime Minister from office and removed Liz Truss, removed Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and removed Liz Truss and fire Kwesi Kwarteng. That is the substance of the governance arrangement in central government, national government, Tobago government, and parties that I am talking about. That's the moral authority we need. It's a historic problem. The whole country faces it. And this is an opportunity for these young people, if they really understand anything, to confront it, understand it, and deal with it.
You're saying that the PNM is a follow the leader kind of party, that there is no mechanism to control the executive in the PNM.
Exactly.
But when we look at the THA, Ansel Dennis said 2 mornings ago, he said that the situation as it stands right now is the chief sec has all the power. He can remove persons from holding key positions within his executive, and that could affect their salary, and they could be their salary could drop to 1/3 of what it currently is.
That's correct, and it was so when Dennis was the chief secretary too.
Right. Well, I guess the point he's making is that Farley has a severe and aggressive tie for power, being the chief sec and being the head of the executive there in terms of the decision-making process.
That is correct.
Right.
But so may I clarify? May I clarify something for you?
Yes.
Farid, that is correct. That is a deadly accurate observation. It was true from 1980. It's true in the parliament in Trinidad as well. Everybody who is a minister owes their loyalty to the prime minister, except otherwise he could move them, he could reshuffle and so on. And neither in Tobago nor in Trinidad do you have a mechanism by which the public can evaluate the work of the prime minister or the chief secretary except through an election. That is the inefficiency built into the system that has to be dealt with. Dennis didn't understand it. Charles didn't understand it. Charles, capital A, didn't understand it. Right? And so on. It's a huge problem that exists in the belly of all governments in the Caribbean, that the executive operates with the head of the executive as a virtual king, with nobody to oversee the work of the king, right? And the king being able to oversee everybody else's work. That is the problem that Farley has to address now by saying to the people at Tobago, I understand this, and I want to set up mechanisms to provide you mechanisms now to oversee my work, even though I have the responsibility to monitor what the secretaries are doing. If he doesn't understand that, we don't stand a chance, and we have to remove him from office.
You're saying that the faces, well, inter alia, you're saying that the faces haven't changed, times haven't changed, that the issues remain the same. You said that Absolutely. Indirectly by saying that in 1980 we had the same problem with Robinson. We had the same
Absolutely.
problem with Anson Dennis.
Absolutely. It's the same structural problem built into the design of the THA as government, but I remind you, it's the same structural problem built into the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. You have no mechanisms to oversee the work of the Prime Minister, even though he is responsible to oversee the work of his ministers. That wasn't so in Britain this year. The Conservative Party alone removed Boris Johnson, and the rest of the parliament would have helped him. And the Conservative Party alone removed Liz Truss from office for incompetence. Boris Johnson for being lawless.
So, are we correct in saying that there are democratic structures in place within the UK to remove a leader who is dysfunctional or to remove a leader who is not functioning as the party would like him to function?
Exactly. That's what we saw twice this year.
Yeah. What democratic structures? Because this is not the first forum in which you mentioned that the democratic structures are not in place in order to contain and constrain and control the chief sec. What are the democratic structures? Could you give me some examples or share with the public some examples that you think should be put in place in terms of democratic structures? Because that is it's very open-ended when you say democratic structures. What exactly do you think needs to be put?
It's easy to give you clear answers to that, and very early in the term, in December, to say nothing of January and February, I prepared a design for the government here to set out for the country's benefit a way to bring the public, to empower the public and bring the public into the process and provide a mechanism by which the public could oversee the work of the chief secretary. That mechanism is this. All right. Now as the law is written, you have the vast majority of the members of the THA in the Executive Council. And as a consequence, nothing is possible inside the THA at this time. What I'm about to tell you should be put in place now. And then when you change the law, you rewrite the THA Act, you provide for this design. Now, okay, what I propose then is that we have 8 divisions. I would set up a set of 5 overlapping advisory committees of distinguished Tobagonians and other representatives, distinguished scholars, selections from here, from there, agriculture, farmers, this, that, the other, or a set of 5 advisory committees whose job it is to get from the public service, when they bring forward proposals, the proposals that they bring, do research, do investigations, and consider the implications of those policies in consultation with the public. So they will bring in the public, they will call hearings on whatever the public service is proposing and ask the public, well, what do you think? Is this what you want to do? So when you bring forward the budget, if you bring it up 4 months before you have to carry it to Port of Spain, for example, in Tobago's case, you bring it to the people, you bring it to the public, and there would be an advisory budgetary committee that could call in the public and ask the public, is this the kind of budget you want? And when the public weighs in, they get to take that along with whatever the public service had proposed and go to the plenary. That's why we elected them as representatives, to sort from among the information they're getting from the public and the public servants and propose a final version. That mechanism would be necessary for all the divisions. You need advisory committees, which are substantively your effort to put in oversight committees in the absence of anything inside the THA. So that's the first step I would take. The second step I would take is I would move with dispatch to get the parliament, get Dr. Rowley to recall his terrible THA bills, THA and autonomy bills, and reform the THA Act that he's proposing to accommodate this mechanism for public participation and put it inside the THA itself. So instead of having 8 THA members in the executive with no oversight, I will have 8 THA members in the executive and say 22 members outside the executive who could form these advisory committees I'm talking about. But they will now be properly called oversight committees of the THA. So if you had 5 oversight committees of the THA, they could effectively do the work to oversee the 8 divisions. And they would be non-executive, but they would be the eyes and ears of the public, because they call in the public to get the public's opinion. And that provides a mechanism by which they then would be able to say, okay, well, you see this way going on in there, Chief Secretary, the people at Tobago don't want that. Or they say, okay, 90% of the time you get what you want, but you see this 10% here, forget it. We don't want that. And he resists that, then he gets the Boris Johnson treatment, because you have enough members to do it. That's the mechanism that you have in the US, you have in Britain. That's the mechanism you need. That's the substance of Westminster, by the way. What we have in Trinidad and Tobago that we call Westminster is bogus Westminster. That's the substance of Westminster.
A British historian once said, Lord Acton, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with it, he was saying, he made a reference that in his observation, a person's sense of morality lessens as his or her power increases. It was also said that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Especially if the system allows it. That may happen, he's right. But if the system puts a roadblock in his way, as the Conservative Party put in Boris Johnson's way, then he could only abuse the power for a limited period of time. The people intervene and say, okay, that's enough. That's what democracy is.
But the democratic structures that you speak of, if that doesn't exist and it doesn't subsist within the provisions of the current THA Act, then this quote about power corrupting and absolute power corrupting, absolutely, it might just fall straight in Fally Augustine's garden.
Quite so. And it may mean that over the course of the next 4 years, he will become the most vilified Tobagonian, and we'll remove him from office in due course when the elections are called. But remember, that's the same thing that happened to the PNM. After 21 years of abusing power, the people of Tobago got so fed up, they put the PDP in power. And we saw it happen before to the PNM in Trinidad when NAR removed them from office, and so on. So this is nothing new in the Caribbean space. The problem with that approach to politics is that it doesn't serve the national interest to have a prime minister who is dysfunctional remaining in power, have a chief secretary who is dysfunctional remaining in power for 4 years, wasting the people's time. You need a mechanism built into the governance structure to remove the head of government if he deserves to be moved. In the American case, they limit the conditions under which you could remove the president, but the mechanism is there: high crimes and misdemeanors. The mechanism is there for the parliament to remove the president from office if he practices high crimes and misdemeanors. But in the case of the British system that Westminster is that we vouch to be following, the mechanism is you are dysfunctional in the sense that you demonstrate gross incompetence, or you're corrupt, or any of the above. So you could remove the prime minister, you could remove the chief secretary, if in the opinion of the majority of members in the Parliament of Tobago, in the THA, you can be properly charged with incompetence. For example, now the system that we have, the THA as we have it designed, doesn't allow them to do that because everybody in the executive are aligned to it. That's what you have to change. That's what you have to change in Trinidad as well.
In the Trinidad Newsday on December 6th, it was carried that they were trying to voice different people in Tobago in terms of hearing what they have to say, meaning that the man on the street. I just want to quote very briefly what one man in Montpelier said. He indicated, and I'm quoting him here, basically, if the entire team resigned from the PDP, while I don't understand the reasoning for that, send us back to the polls and let us, the people, decide. You all walked around and asked people for vote under a PDP banner, under a PDP banner. So if you're no longer PDP, what are you? So it invites the question, there are similar sentiments. It invites the question, if it is people voted, whether people in Tobago voted for the party, PDP, or whether they voted for the candidate. If the people voted for the party, then the people would have married themselves to the aspirations of the People's Democratic Party. Or the position may simply be, now that they're independent, is it that Fally is divorcing himself from the PDP's mandate, or is he adopting the PDP's mandate and moving forward swiftly and seamlessly with that, leaving Watson Duke in the dust?
Well, let me jump in and say a couple of things. First of all, on the matter of the mandate, let's put that to one side. When I participated in the campaign, and I think the people heard my voice, and I didn't speak to anything they are calling a mandate. I laid out for the people of Tobago just the issues I'm raising with you here. The promise that we would be able to work the arrangement with Fally as executive of the government, head of the executive, and Watson as head of the party. And I promised them, I said, you could trust this deal, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. I think I know how to guide them to get it to work. That's one of the key reasons the people of Tobago voted for this group of people. And they call me every day and say, well, you tell me you could I get anything to work. You ain't get it to work. What you gonna tell me now? Okay, so that's one thing. The way the law works, the way the Constitution works, the way the THA Act works, parties organize campaigns and the representatives belonging to the party win. But remember how we set up the thing. Each constituency votes for a set of people, for a person to go and represent their views, the members of the constituency's views in the THA. What a political party really is, and the public generally doesn't tend to think of it this way, but what a political party really is an institutional arrangement to organize the members of the community in such a way that they could have an effective mechanism through which to get their views via the party channels all the way to the THA. That's the same in Trinidad. That's what political parties really do. They are perhaps the best mechanism we've invented in human society to organize the members of the public in a way that they could find a mechanism to channel their views to the government. That's That's what a political party really does. That's one thing. Now, the PDP didn't set up that mechanism properly. So both Farley and Watson fall there, and the rest of the membership of the party, to the extent that you can hold the members of a party responsible, right? That's a cultural problem. And as I said to you before, it's no different in the UNC, it's no different in the PNM. Now, that's a problem all of us in this society must think through and find a way to solve. In other words, we must find a way to set up democratic parties. So you could call for a new election like the guy is saying in Montpelier. But you have to not forget that there is a deeper problem behind the election. We had this problem since Robinson. You're going on year in, year out, year in, year out. I remember when I came back home from doing my PhD, to find myself in the Port of Spain market asking people, as I was about to go to UWI to teach, and asking people, well, what happened there with this insurrection and so on? And people telling me they should have killed us. That's what I mean. The vitriol against Robinson was palpable in the air in Trinidad when I came back. It's because if you set up government in a way that government then tends to govern us rather than govern with us, you run a great risk that every Monday morning, every decision you make is wrong, and you're just angering people more and more and more until they become the bigger half of the society and they drive you out of power. That's the risk these guys run, and any group you put into the THA will run that same risk. That's what happened to the PNM. Don't forget, the PNM can't just say, put us back in power, because it's the same problem. So you'll just be going from cycle to cycle to cycle with a fundamental political organization problem on your hands, not being solved. So my suggestion would be any group that is committed to grappling with these two fundamental issues I'm raising, empowerment of the people. That's what NJAC, for example, was raising back in 1970 when it resonated so well across the population in Trinidad and Tobago. It's the same issue today. It has never been solved. The empowerment of the people in the sense of affording them a proper channel, a proper set of channels through which they could influence the decisions of the executive. Let me also make the point that that is what Watson is complaining about, has been complaining about. He kept complaining that he had no way to govern Farley. Well, if you set up the undemocratic party, you wouldn't have the channels from inside the party. And if you set up a government in an undemocratic way, you will not have any channels through the democratic structures we need. And I warned them in December of 2021, if you govern like the PNM, you will reap PNM results, which is mess and confusion. You remember that back in 1956, 57, 58, Williams and CLR James fell out and almost mashed up the PNM over the same fundamental issues. And the PNM has really never been a stable party ever since then. Daga's mother was a major PNM member. Daga came from in the belly of the PNM, for example. The PNM has always been subject to this kind of commerce and confusion. But of course, race in Trinidad and Tobago would keep them in power. Farley doesn't have that to lean on in Tobago. So as a consequence of that, he could only survive against the voices of the people if he moves to listen to them. And to hear them, he has to reform the way we set up the THA, and he has to set up a party with the channels of democracy inside itself. If I don't know they are capable of doing either of the two things I'm saying, but if they don't, they will be removed from office. And let me say, that doesn't mean we will put a man like Watson Duke. The reason we didn't put Watson Duke to be chief secretary in the first place was because if he had come to the people of Tobago as the leader of the party, as the designated chief secretary, PDP would lose the election. For example, I wouldn't campaign for them. I would campaign against them publicly and openly, as I did against Ashot Jack.
Would it be correct to say that Farley has not learned from his observations of the past?
We'll have to see. I will be able to engage with him and his other members, and I will, as a scholar myself, I'll be able to make a judgment on that. But the excuse they have been giving me as to why they haven't moved to set up the government the way I suggested, they told me earlier in the year the budget lines were not in place, and they can't spend money to do what I'm proposing if the budget lines are not available. Okay, well, now we've gone to the government and gotten a new set of budgets, and they just a couple of weeks ago went in retreat and reallocated. So now I hope they will have come out of that with lines to fund the empowerment of the public. If you didn't do that, that is what will tell me that he does not understand what he's doing.
The blueprint for the democratic structures you identified earlier, has Farley Augustine and his executive embraced your blueprint or the blueprint that you suggested?
Well, let me tell you. Let me give you the facts. Right after the election, the morning after the election, Watson Duke came up to my house, and I laid that out for him. He said, "Okay, let me start with 2, and then see." I said, "It can't work. You have to try all of them one time. Put them in place." The next day, for about 4 hours, I start on the phone with Farley and explain the same thing. He said, "Okay, I agree with you." Okay. The next morning, the next day, after he set up the government, the press asked Farley, "Well, what about Dr. James?" He said, "Well, Dr. James has said he doesn't want any place in the executive." That's true. But he gives me advice. I take some and I don't take some. The some that he don't take is what is vital to the interests of both the party and the people of Tobago, as far as I could see, if I'm to judge the experience of the last year. My hope now would be that you've gotten yourself into a big mess here, and you would be smart enough to pause and pay attention to the fundamentals beneath the disruption that your government is now experiencing. And we'll see. We will all be here to see if he has learned from that. If he hasn't learned from it, it wouldn't be anything strange. Robinson didn't learn from it. Robinson said you can't eat Constitution. Williams didn't learn from it. Rowley ain't learned nothing from it. He said he don't want to change the rules.
The thing with it is, why change the rules when you are the main beneficiary of the rule?
Exactly
when you're
right.
out of the THA, you could want change, but when you're
Exactly.
in the THA, it's like, no, I'm getting all the trappings and benefits of office.
Exactly. Well, if you look through the lens of dictatorship, that's a great question to ask. But if you look through the lens of an understanding of what it takes to develop our people and to develop the country, the logical answer to that is the institutional arrangements are not adequate to support the development process of Tobago or Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago, for example, is so dependent on Trinidad that the nation needs Tobago to take an active role in developing an economy here. It is not possible for that to happen if it is a dictatorial government you're running. So it is in the country's interest for the THA to be set up properly to allow effective decision-making processes and to allow sound projects to be put in place with supporting policies to move the economy forward. That's the answer to the question, why do it even if you are enjoying the full trappings of power? But I don't know that they will hear it. And I don't know that. Sometimes I say to my students, it may take an earthquake for people to come to grips with the challenges and the need for change. Now, you see what's going on in Haiti? They are in a situation now where they need these kinds of fundamental reforms. Otherwise, the society crumbles. And that's the way we are all going. A colleague just pointed out to me, that looks like the end game for everybody. You see what's going on in Jamaica today? With a dictatorial government in place. It doesn't work anywhere. It doesn't work in Cuba. It doesn't work here. It doesn't work in Barbados, notwithstanding the rock star status that Mia Motley has. And it's not going to work with this young man in Grenada that we just put in place. No authoritarian, over-centralized government stands any chance of leading any Caribbean country into a serious development process. So that's the reason to do it.
If the THA is not set up properly, with democratic structures that allows the voice of the people to be heard and policies be put in place for their betterment, then only the people in Tobago would suffer. 4 years of the next 4 years will maybe very well 4 years of stagnation in Tobago again.
Well, it's not only the people of Tobago, Farid, that would suffer. Unless Trinidadians decide to secede. If Trinidad decides to secede, then Tobago will, what you say, they will make sense and will come to fruition. But if Trinidad doesn't decide to secede, then every year you have to find 80% of the expenditures of Tobago to funnel into this economy. It doesn't make sense for the country. It doesn't make sense. The country suffers when Tobago doesn't carry its weight. That is why the government in Trinidad needs to understand what I am saying about what is needed here, even if it is unwilling to do it in Trinidad itself. It still needs to let us do it here, because the price of not doing it in Tobago every year is $2 billion. Tobago's economy could cover about 18% of the 2.3 or 2.4 billion coming out of the budget to Tobago. The economy we have could only fund about that, excluding considerations of the gas north of Tobago. And even if you brought that into consideration, it would still not be adequate. You still, just as it's not adequate in Trinidad, so they rely only on oil and gas. You have to develop the economy. And you are not having any more success in Trinidad in diversifying the national economy under this terrible governance arrangement than we are having in Tobago. And let me tell you, the evidence, the international evidence, the evidence that I have been working with in my capacity as a consultant for WIPO over the years, and I've written and published stuff on it. The evidence you have is you have to carry all three pillars of development forward at the same time. The institutions have to be upgraded. The economic restructuring has to be done towards a bigger share of sectors that can produce capital in the economy. And you have to grow your capacity to innovate. All three simultaneously. That is what makes development hard. And what governments in the Caribbean tend to think is that you could try to fix the economy and leave governance behind. That is not going to work. It's not going to work in Jamaica. It hasn't been working. They are earning $5,600 per person with this huge tourism sector around them. That's peppercorn, way below where they should be. We look at Cayman. Cayman, 91,000, with a population barely bigger than Tobago. 91,000 per person per year. So, terrible governance arrangements has a price. It drags your economic development back. And the governments of the Caribbean need to wake up and smell that coffee. And Tobago has a chance to open that door, if only we could get those we elect to hear.
You're saying that we can't fix the economy in Tobago and leave good governance behind.
That's
or
right.
leave governance behind.
Right.
So essentially what you're saying is that unless the current executive aligns itself with what is needed in Tobago on the ground, in terms of fixing an economy, in terms of the needs of Tobago, right, then it will, is it that you're saying that that diversion, that walk in different directions will only affect Tobago in a negative light? We can't have we can't achieve in Tobago what is desired unless the leaders are working together in unison.
Unless we put a governance arrangement in place that allows the public to participate in decision making, in effective policy making, and we have part of that, a political party or a set of political parties that can filter from the public the opinions of the people in their constituencies back into the parliament through their party executives. But the people, the membership of the party, get to tell the executives of the party, this is what you have to go to the parliament and represent for us. Now, let me remind you, let's take the economy as a case in point. Tobago is in desperate need of a development plan. Now, how do you do that? I'm a professional planner. The way you do that is you go to the private sector and you ask, what are your investment plans? So what we normally do for that to happen is we do a capital expenditure survey. We look back 2 years, we look forward 2 years, take the current year, and we are able to build projections that will allow us to say, well, this is where the private sector is trying to go. Government then, the divisions of the THA in this particular case, will then, knowing the intent of the private sector, will then be able to design supporting projects and policies to allow that intent to work. And of course, could influence and lead in the process. Now, you could see the model there. The government's contribution to the development plan is anchored on its knowledge of what the private sector wants to do. That's the model. That's the model for development planning. It's the model for economic development. It's the model we've never really tried in Trinidad and Tobago. The CSO has never done for the country a professionally done CapEx survey. Never. Throughout its entire history. So all this Vision 2030 and Vision 2020 and all these things have been anchored on sheer guesswork, masquerading as mathematical modeling by economists. Sheer guesswork. The government has never known exactly what the private sector is trying to do on the investment front. Without that knowledge of the investment intent of the private sector in Tobago, we cannot build a development plan here. And I've been trying to tell the government that since January when they asked me to help them do a development plan. Now the business sector is beginning to take the stance in Tobago that it can't wait anymore. It is going to act as a responsible public. We, the people, own the country. We're going to lay out for the government exactly what we want to do for investment. We're going to say, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to go. This is what we need you as a government to do. That's the right approach of a private sector in Trinidad or in Tobago. It's the right approach. And if they do that, that's signaling to you that the population in Tobago is not quite as backward as people tend to think. This is a population that is wise to its responsibility to put a government in power and force the government to do what it wants. It doesn't have the mechanisms in the law because of the work of Ellis Clark and Robinson and all these people, Ramesh, who drafted this THA act that we have in our hands here today. And it's not going to come out of what already has in the parliament. So we, the people, are going to have to say, this is what we want. This is the kind of government we want. This is the kind of development process we want. And you have to have a government that is capable of listening to that. That is what we're going to be trying to tell Farley and his team if the opportunity comes along. If he doesn't make the opportunity available, then he will pay the price.
Is it correct to say that until there's a symbiotic relationship between the business community and the existing THA, that we may not get the progress we want?
Exactly. That's the same, not just for the business community, for the population. You're exactly right, Farid. That's a nice way to put it. You have to have a symbiotic relationship between the people and the government. You cannot govern the people. You have to govern with the people. That's the principle.
Farley Augustine, in his current incarnation, and I'm saying current meaning what has developed in the past 2 days, does he recognize, in your understanding, does he recognize that he needs to have that sort of symbiotic relationship with the business sector in order to develop a development plan for Tobago?
I can't say that because I can't say he has, because the biggest complaint that I get from the public in Tobago pretty much daily is people saying they can't get Farley. They can't get them. Boy, I can't get them. I call them, I can't get them. That's the main complaint I get. And as long as you can't get them, you can't have a symbiotic relationship. And you cannot have a symbiotic relationship if you do not have structures through which it would work. What you call in a symbiotic relationship works when there are mechanisms that would allow the people to say to the government, this is what we think. This is what we're trying. This is where we want to go. Bring policies to support this. That's what is meant in the rest of the world by saying that government facilitates the private sector. Government doesn't compete. The private sector will do that, but it needs the facilitation of government. That's what we mean in economics when we say government has to deal with things like market failure and stuff like that. So there is a sense here in which it's not clear that the behavior of the last year signals that Farley understands what he's up to. But that's nothing new in the context of Tobago. That's been the case for 42 years with the governments we have. And I don't know if it's any different. I must tell you, I don't think it's any different in Trinidad. The country needs to sort out this problem. It's an old problem coming all the way back, quite frankly, from slavery and strict indenture to today. It's an old missing ingredient in the way we set up these countries. When we started the independence march, we've got 60 years now, and here we are. And we still have not sorted out this problem of poor governance in Trinidad and Tobago.
Would it be correct to say that currently there appears to be some disconnect between the executive members and its constituency, in the sense that they are not the executive members, nor they have ascended into office? If Farley is not reachable, it means to say that he's not in contact with the people in Tobago. Reachable in the context of they must be able to have access to him. People elect persons into office so those persons can execute the will of the people whilst they're in office. If
that they could know their will. That is correct. I would say, there's a great risk that is the situation we are dealing with here. There is the absence of what you're calling a symbiotic relationship, because the communication mechanisms have broken down. Even the media has trouble getting access to Farley. And if you set up the government in such a way that everybody had to get access to you, and then you're not answering your phone, you have a problem, right? The communication aspects of good governance would disappear. But the fundamental solution is not that you must be able to pick up your phone and call Farley. Is that the government must be set up in such a way that the institutional arrangements exist, so we don't have to call Farley. You can go to the oversight committees and lay out your thoughts. The mechanism must be there. The public must expect that these arrangements are there. When they have concerns, when they have policies to promote and so on, they could go to those hearings and lay them out. When I was a professor in City University back in the 1990s, I participated in a process of assisting citizens of New York to prepare submissions and go to the city council with hearings on anything from the budget. You had to have 4 months before you could take the budget to the city council. The mayor had to go around in every one of the boroughs and make the budget, do the budget hearings and let people weigh in. In Tobago, the chief secretary and his team sits down in the office and write a budget and send it down to Trinidad. Tobagonians have no say in it. That is what is missing. But the budget in Trinidad is not made any differently. Every year, the Minister of Finance comes and announces a budget as a lord of all things. And you in the country have no say for the 6 months before in what is going to go into this budget. That's my point about government by dictates from above, governing of the people. You're governing them rather than allowing them to participate in governing themselves. That's what we have to deal with. And we can spend a lot of time beyond this and talk about where we have to go with the economy and how that fits in to the business of good governance, where we have to go with our capacity to innovate and how that fits in and so on. We can spend a lot of time and add those dimensions. But the culture of the Caribbean, especially the English Caribbean, but it was no different in Dumrep with Trujillo and the legacies of Trujillo and so on, or Cuba and Fidel and all of that. The culture of the Caribbean space, authoritarian space, is that you govern from on high. We translate slavery down one step and we dictate at every turn. And you see it in the churches, you see it in the homes, you see it in the schools, everywhere you look. And it's alive and well in the political parties. And it's built into the constitutional arrangement of Trinidad and Tobago and into the law that governs Tobago, the THA Act. And we have to deal with it.
It was recently carried in the newspaper that those post-cabinet press conferences that they normally have at national levels, that they haven't had one for some time. So it's almost as if what you're saying there is married into the national politics too. That accountability and let's say in Tobago's instance where Fally is inaccessible now, it's almost as if now that he's assumed power, he's in a position where he has divorced himself from listening to what the people are saying, and he's operating in the capacity is now that I've been elected and I've assumed office, that whatever I do, the people are on board with me because they elected me into office.
And it's not just him, remember, the other secretaries get to behave exactly that way. I mean, look at the fiasco with that stuff they built on Milford Road into the sea when the EMA was saying, no, we don't agree. The excuse given by the secretary was, we're busy, we're rushing to do something for the people. So you break the law and you act in a lawless way, notwithstanding that we, as a people, put those arrangements in place to protect our environment. And you are saying you're willing to break it because you're busy. That sort of behavior would not be tolerated in a substantive democracy. So it's not just Fally that can't hear. Once you have a system as we have designed it, when you read the THA Act gives general direction and control of a division to the secretary with no oversight. That's the problem. It's there in the divisions. It's there in the overall THA Executive Council. We have to, how does it make sense for us to put a THA in power with an Executive Council with no oversight at all? You can't get oversight from the Parliament in Trinidad because it's not politically feasible. And you can't get any oversight from the people of Tobago. How does that make sense, Farid? It cannot. In other words, the Chief Secretary is saying he's going to go ahead and do reshuffle in 2023. Tells us in Tobago we could expect a reshuffle. So he exercises the right to evaluate the work of all of his secretaries. Well, who evaluates his job? Well, it can't be the secretaries, except that they could do the evaluation and decide to remove him as chief secretary. They could do that. But every day they go to the executive council, they check in their loyalty with him. So you need mechanisms in the THA to evaluate Fally's job. And that's what you saw happen in the British Parliament to Boris Johnson. They didn't blame the ministers, they blamed Boris Johnson. And they didn't blame Liz Truss, they didn't blame Kwesi Kwarteng alone, they blamed Liz Truss too. And they removed both of them. That's the substance of democracy. The representatives of the people get to evaluate the head of the executive. We have no such design in Trinidad or Tobago. How will you make progress? We're not going to make any progress unless we deal with that problem.
Richard is with us now. Richard, how are you? All is well? You're good?
Yeah, I've been listening to both you and Dr. James. Today I had another visit to my doctor. I was ill, and I just finished there, so I still am take it on their home. So
again, we hope you're healthy enough.
No, well, they told me to give me a clean bill of health today, so let us thank the Lord for that. I was suffering with the influenza virus.
Okay.
But it's nice to have Dr. James on, and I've listened to Dr. James for quite some time now, in particular over the last 2 elections in Tobago. And I want to tell you, I've become an admirer of the way I analyze things, and even Dr. Winford James. And I told him that the other day in Tobago. I met him in a function with the Credit Union League. Not a wonderful gentleman, and I want to ask both of you to continue to do what you do to protect our island. As I said yesterday, I'm a Tobagonian. The only one in my family who was born on the island there. So they called me the Tobagonian in my home. And I go to Tobago every single week, because if that's my home, that's my home. Yeah, that is it. So, and I think you and Dr. James, both of you doctors, you all are contributing significantly to the advancement of Tobago. Don't take on the naysayers, continue to push forward. and help our island, the Twin Island Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, to move forward and to become equal to that of Trinidad, so that people in Tobago could have their real independence and have systems in place as we do in Trinidad. As you were saying, to have oversight over the THA and all these things, and do what is required to help advance the people's lives in Tobago by making them genuine economic participants of the economy in Tobago, so that they could, enhance the quality of their lives, and they could respond to the cost of living, and they could improve the standard of living. That is what we want at the end of the day for people in Tobago. So they could move around Trinidad and Tobago with ease, with comfort. They could travel the world and feel like genuine citizens of this global country we have now, because based on the technology, the whole world is interconnected. So Tobago must not be left out of that. So I wanted to say that to you, Mr. Dr. James. Barrington Skippy, who always, I don't know, he knows you well. He's a big fan of you all as well. And he's the one who introduced your intellectualism by playing some of your clips on the show some time ago. And it was really impressive. So, and Skippy's are committed to Begonian too as well. So, as I said, I ask you all to continue to do the good job. As it relates to the current development of Tobago, I don't know, I missed what may have been your take on it. I don't know if you have said it already, then I wouldn't interfere to all listeners to ask you to repeat it. But if you haven't, what is your position on the Declaration of Independence by about 12 or 13 of the assemblymen?
Well, I told Fareed at the start that the fundamental moral obligation is to lay out, is to call the people of Tobago and lay out before the people what they plan to do to set up proper mechanisms of representation, constituents. I used to, Richie, I used to go to the action groups and help them with technical advice and even financing and so on. And once the break apart came, all the action groups crumbled. So that structure that underwrites effective representative government through a political party has to be restored and rebuilt. And that's obligation number 2 that they have. But obligation number 1, I was saying to Fareed, is the obligation to establish proper mechanisms through which the people of Tobago could engage the THA in the policy-making process. Every time policy proposals are put forward by the public sector, by the public service, there needs to be a way for the people of Tobago to weigh in on the policies and say what they think about them and whether they go with them or they're not going with them. Everything you do in politics is wrong when you're really not going in the direction the people want. And by and large, right in politics is doing what the people want, and wrong in politics is doing what the people don't agree with. So that would provide a mechanism through which a second channel of policy making could be exploited with better information than the public service normally uses. Because the public service normally relies on random samples. But this is where the coalition of the willing would come together to say what you ought to be doing in agriculture, what you ought to be doing in education, and so on. And you take those along with the public service proposals to the plenary and agree in the plenary. That's what we elected all these people to go and do. Take them, consider them, bring them together and say, all right, already let me to decide. This is what we decide. It would be foolhardy for any government to simply ignore the input from the public. And that's the missing ingredient, and the moral responsibility of this group is to put those 2 sets of mechanisms in place. Now, they can't put the representative mechanism in place unless they organize themselves as a political party, as far as I understand it. That's one of the clever designs of Western civilization. And I don't see how they will get along unless they undertake that responsibility. That's a burden that has fallen on them because of their failure to get the PDP to work properly. But that is their fate in history. Now, let me give you an explanation of why that is so critical. I was telling Fareed, without that, you cannot build a viable economy in Tobago. Without a mechanism through which the private sector could tell the government what its investment plans are, the public sector cannot make a proper development plan for Tobago. They tried, two made by Ralph Henry in his office. Both of them failed under the PNM. CDP 1 and CDP 2. Where we are today is the consequence of applying two completely irrelevant set of policies because they were not anchored on a capital expenditure survey to find out what the private sector wants to do in Tobago. Well, let me remind you that none has been done in Trinidad either, ever throughout the country's history. And that underlies the reason why the country has failed to diversify its economy. We're trying to do it on ignorance. In Tobago, to have a chance, you must do one, or you must set up the hearings mechanism to call in the private sector to tell you what they want to do. Either of those could work, but the hearings mechanism is the better mechanism. If you put any one of them together, of course, you hear what the private sector has to say. And if you do that, what happens? You exploit the development potential of Tobago. And I promise you, if you exploit the development potential of a place like Tobago, it would move the national economy far beyond the $19,000 per person that the Minister of Finance boasted about in the last budget statement. We'll catch up in 30 years with where the Cayman Islands is, 91,000. In 50 years, we'll catch up with Bermuda. Trinidad and Tobago will benefit from exploiting the economic potential of Tobago. But Trinidad and Tobago cannot extract that benefit if it sits by and allows this dysfunctional approach to government in this space. And that's the substance of what I make of what is happening here. I am not terribly interested in whether they should call it or not.
And Doctor, why you believe they do not want to exploit the economic possibilities of Tobago?
Well, you know, my general take on all of these things about reluctance to embrace these processes is a complex thing. First of all, you give people power, and the Caribbean authoritarian streak comes alive right away. And so they don't want to change the mechanisms that make them maximum leaders in their sphere. That's a problem that we have to address in the culture. Don't forget, people think that in a negotiation, as soon as you begin to make any concessions, people think you're weak. Democracy requires a certain amount of weakness on the part of the participants to make concessions to one another. And once you don't have that culture of consensus building, you have trouble. So that's half of the problem. But the other half of it is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the requirements of development for the people of Tobago and for the nation, for that matter. I don't think it's much different for Trinidad and Tobago. That's why we had 50 years of failure to diversify the national economy. But in the case of Tobago, with the additional dependence on Trinidad, it's urgent that we come to grips with the point I'm making. And I think it's fundamentally about inadequate scholarship, inadequate understanding of the nature of a democracy and the nature of a development process that explains the actual behavior. That's what I got from watching them work over the last year, in spite of all the reporting and advice and so on that I've given to them.
Doc, I do believe there are a lot
say
of
80% incompetence.
Well, there you go. I guess because that's where I was going to come.
Yeah.
Because any person who really wants, because the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has not been doing well for quite some time.
Right.
Some may argue that it is just as bad as how they met it in 2015. Some may say it's slightly improved or it's even worse.
Right.
Which means after 7 years, they have really done nothing meaningfully to move the economy forward, which is to say to grow the economy.
Right.
There could even be an argument that we have moved from recession to depression, right? and which means it's not that the citizens cannot access Forex as we were promised that we would have received in 2015. Going into 2016, that problem we had with Forex, so citizens could travel, that would have been a thing of the past. That hasn't happened. It has worsened. So, is there any reasonableness to think that we have the skill sets and the political willingness, that's all I'll put it, to do what is required to help to grow this economy, and in so doing demonstrate innovativeness and creativeness to help find what Tobago has to offer in other parts of the country to develop another booming sector that we could say, this sector would be viewed as a form of diversification, since it's a new booming sector to help in the generation of additional revenues for the country.
The skill sets are there. There's never been any doubt in my mind ever since I was a young fella.
I was talking about the skill sets in the current administration.
The skill sets are there in a sense. These are intelligent people. They are university trained people and so on. And that's the basic logic that we have worked with in the country throughout my lifetime. The issue is the institutional arrangements need to be put in place. And we have to have a proper conversation in the country, political conversation about what those really are. Now, I think the difficulty that I see is not that they wouldn't understand in the analytical sense. It's that the political circumstances had not sort of come down on them. So they're forced to pause and think. And I think what's going on right now in Tobago makes this an opportunity for them to stop and learn. If they stop and listen and engage and learn, they will see that in the absence of the fundamental changes that we're talking about, they cannot win back the confidence of the people of Tobago. And in the presence of those, they have a real shot at winning it back, as any other group would have if they do the things that we're talking about that fits the requirements of our historic development process. So they can, they can learn. But, my mama used to say sometimes, stick brick in your ears and you can't hear. And so the intelligence is not your problem. It's that stick brick in your ears. They may be able to hear, but they cannot listen and pause and think. And now these circumstances are forcing them to pause and think. So the calls I get from them will suggest that they're interested now for once and for all in confronting these issues. We'll have to see though.
You said that the chief secretary would have to roll out a plan in terms of going to meet with the people based on the new development, with 13 of them declaring themselves as independents. They have to do that before they form another political party.
That is correct. They have to go forward from here. They have to lay out for the public where exactly they think they want to carry Tobago, both at the level of the governance and the economy and so on, and at the level of the organization to get proper representation for their constituents. The business community is going to speak out next Thursday, on this matter and say, well, okay, we are at a juncture here, so we need to get this done, that done, the other done. We need the plan, we need the survey, we need this, we need that. The business community will lay its cards out before the public. And so that will give them an opportunity to hear what the business community is saying about putting in place a model to respond to the needs that the public expresses. But you never know. Some governments, when they hear the people talk, say, well, they're against me. You know what I mean? And there's always that danger. Someone told me a couple of days ago that Fally said he didn't know who to trust. So, you get it, you're practicing authoritarian government. How would you know who to trust? That's always the problem of dictatorship.
Well, Doctor, what has happened, once you're talking in a way to cause those in power to interpret what you're saying to be in their favor, they have no problem with you.
That's correct.
From the time you are able to express something that they could interpret, that may not necessarily against them,
but we dilute the power.
That's it. Well, all of a sudden you're under attack. I've suffered a lot of that, you know. I continue to be under that type of attack. They come across as though we don't have democracy here. We do not have freedom of speech. You only talk one way or else.
Exactly.
You know, and that is something we have to fight against. That I agree. We have to do something in our system to allow people to speak freely without the potential or the possibility of being exposed to victimization.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If not, we are not really free. We are not really free.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we cannot learn from one another to be able to make progress. Remember, peer-to-peer learning is the main form of learning. But if you bottle up people with fear, you can't have no peer-to-peer learning.
None. What you're going to have is a broader spread of more people embracing fear.
Exactly.
And you can't go forward with that. How that could advance the people of a country. How that could make people look inwardly to extract from within themselves the best that they could do and the best that they could attempt to become for themselves. When you condition them to only embrace fear.
That's correct. And you see, another way to put that is to say that you have to set up the country to give people a chance to practice democracy, to practice this fearlessness that you're talking about. If you don't do that, you have an inhibited society that will always be behind the rest of the world.
No, I have to turn the floor back over to Mr. Farid. Well, let me just say this before we go. I would want to get your opinion on this, Doctor. I was happy to see the extent of the freedom that Tobagonians, us as Tobagonians, operate with politically, right? Whenever we have something that is working, we hold on to it. And when the time comes when we believe it's not working, we dismiss it. We get rid of it.
Course, definitely.
Yeah. And that is what was demonstrated 1 year ago. And I was proud to see that we maintain that in Tobago, that if it's not working in our interest, then we have the right and power to do something about it.
That is
and
correct.
Tobagonians, we have always been admired for doing that. Based on what has developed right now today with the declaration of 13 persons being independent and so on, and now they may have to form a new party and so on. I'm disappointed in that because I'd really like to see what the PDP could have done, as an alternative to get it to work and to free the people in the way they are aspiring to become free in Tobago. I thought the PDP would have done that. On the contrary, right now, what they did is position them to fall back into the same thing they just tried to run away from. You understand? What could they do to recapture this in 3 years' time? Because the THA election is every 4 years. 1 year has gone.
Well, the group that remains of the PDP have to do the things I'm recommending. Let me be blunt about that. They have to understand that whatever they put together as a political party has to be a democratic party. Has to be a party in which the members of the party control the executive of the party. Without that mechanism, there will be no way for people to funnel their views through the executive party to the THA. That's what Watson was complaining about. And he wasn't prepared to do that work. I sat down with him for hours on end to explain to him that is the work to be done. But I had too much work because that is not rabble rousing. That is institution building in every constituency. Now, they will have to confront that. That's not easy to do, because you need an army of capable people like myself, for example, to help them. But if they're willing, even now I will be prepared to assist them. That's one.
I honestly don't see them surviving without the intervention and support of you and Dr. James.
People like that. Okay, but that's one of the things they have to do. But the much more important thing they have to do now, if they have to last the 3 years, is set up the government and convince the people of Tobago that we need to hear from you routinely as we attempt to do our jobs. And if they are not willing to do those or able to do those two things, we will move them out of office even before the time will come for the next election. They can't stay there and just waste another 4 years of our time in the way the PNM got to waste 21 years. So they need to hear what we have to say as a people.
No political party has the power to waste the citizens' lives for 4 years and believe they had the power to give it back. None. And believe that they had the power to give them back 4 years. 4 years in a person's life is a lot of years still. And you can't just you just can't allow them to go down an avenue of wastage where that time is concerned. You have to be able to.
Lost a year already, Richard. There's a whole year.
A whole year gone. Nothing serious has happened. Nothing. And that already is a huge disappointment to the people who believe that they got something differently, which now they are arguing. They are not certain if they got anything different at all. And that is hugely disappointing. Yeah, that is sad. Yeah. Let me bring back in Fareed. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You're welcome, Richard. Good to see you.
Dr. James, the Progressive Democratic Patriots. The Progressive Democratic Patriots, we can safely say, was conceived from the loin of a Tobagonian. We cannot say where that conception took place, but we could say it was conceived from the loin of a Tobagonian in Watson Duke.
Yeah.
Now, the PDP is projecting itself as a national political party. My question is this. With what has transpired over the past 2 days, the resignations, Duke stands alone, Duke has been left with the structure that is, or the shell that is the PDP. But the engineering work and the laborers have they take the engine and walk with it. They're gone. What does that mean for the political stability and the future of the PDP moving forward?
Well, I think the idea of a PDP as a national party is a massive illusion in the mind of Watson Duke. There's no way, especially now. There was never any way in my view, but especially now in the light of these developments in Tobago, there is no way Watson could find any credibility anywhere in the East-West corridor. And without the capacity to win that kind of credibility, even in local government, when all the rest of us in the country are talking. Remember, in an election, you alone talking is all right, but when you get to an election and everybody talking, that's when opinions are really formed. And in the context of a real election in which people can scrutinize what we are calling Watson Duke, he will have virtually no chance. So this is a massive illusion on his part. He is not the quality of person that could offer national leadership to Trinidad and Tobago. And Trinidadians are very wise people. They will understand that from the word go. And maybe they'll take his money and spend it as he allows them to. But at the end of the day, there's no such thing as national leadership for Watson Duke. In the context of Tobago, he has now written himself out of the discussion because he's convinced his colleagues that he cannot be relied on. He wasn't going to executive council meetings. He wasn't doing he made a promise to us in April in a meeting that he called with me and Ward Farley and others to undertake the work to set up the party properly. And between then and now, you see the consequence. Nothing has been done by Watson and so on. And Watson has demonstrated to the people of Tobago what their fears were when they made a decision to only support the party if Farley was the designated chief secretary. So he wouldn't be able to overcome that when Tobagonians begin to speak out and when Trinidadians and Tobagonians begin to speak out. And I think there is really nowhere to go for Watson Duke alone forming any party. In the context of Tobago, let me remind you, you don't only need to go to the public and say you want a party or you're forming a party. You also need senior political people like myself to come out and say, we could trust that, we could work with that, we could build that and make that something for you, the people. That's what I promised Tobagonians. And unfortunately, I don't want to say young people have proven to be incompetent and incapable of doing the job. So far, they have proven to be incapable of doing the job, but I don't want to say they've given young people a bad name yet. There's still an opportunity for them to move forward, and we shall see what they do. But Watson ain't going nowhere.
So, is it safe for me to say or to infer that this is the end of Watson Duke?
Well, he learned that in the long term. He may not believe that. You're not the kind of person who will just buy that. But in the long run, you would go around in circles until you learn. Remember Sampat Mehta? Yeah, we see it many times in the country's history.
So it appears that where we are now is that Fali has to form his own political party, or he may form his own political party.
I don't see any way out of that. They are going to have to do that, because that's the only way. And remember, they have to mean something specific by that. You have to form a party, but you have to form a particular kind of party that allows for CLR James's statement to be right. Every cook can govern. Everybody in the party could participate in the leadership. If you don't form that kind of party, you're dead. He will be dead.
If he forms that party, does that mean that he has to go back to the polls within the
if ever you form that kind of party and you show progress on the governance front for Tobago, it's not just you form a party. You have to demonstrate that with the responsibilities we've placed in your hands up until now, you're prepared to do the things that are in the best interest of the country. They have to do both. You cannot do one. Fali cannot go to the people at Tobago and say, I am your leader. That is not going to work. You're going to have to demonstrate that you're willing to participate in a democratic process inside your party and in Tobago. You can't do half and get the whole loaf. It's not going to work. And remember, that's the situation across the Caribbean space, you know. The reason Caribbean societies are so unstable is the absence of this kind of governance that allow people who've been yearning for real freedom for near 300 years to have a say in the way we organize our lives and prosecute our development agenda. To have a say in that. We've been yearning for that for centuries. Post-emancipation especially, post the end of strict indenture. Everybody in the Caribbean sociology have been yearning for that. And if they run afoul of that, the society will make the mistakes that usually turn a society against you, slowly but surely. Every time you make a decision, half the people are against you. And every time you make another decision, the half will be against you, but it's a different half, and it accumulates until you become a villain. That is what has happened. That's what happened to Eric Williams. That's what happened to Robinson in Trinidad. That's what happened to Hochoy in Tobago. It is once you're running a dictatorship across the Caribbean space, you're in big trouble. That's what ran Patrick out of Grenada.
Ansel Dennis may have self-interest at stake when he asks for for fresh elections. That is why he said that what we have there are independents, and they're not. And the Tobagonians didn't vote for independence; they voted for a political party. So that scheme of thinking is skewed in a particular way because
it's too shallow to grapple with the problems we have. It's way too shallow. Because we had the PNM running the THA for 21 years. Look at the mess we are in. Why did we move them last year? What is he talking about? It's for their failure to do the things I'm describing. The PNM is run as a follow the leader party. And in the Tobago space, they have no credible leader. So they have a follow the leader structure that translates into blatant dictatorship. The PNM has never been willing to set up participatory government in Trinidad and Tobago, in Trinidad or in Tobago. They blocked even the creation of the THA. And now Rowley is putting in the parliament a set of bills that will just make a king by law out of the chief secretary in Tobago. In fact, Rowley even wanted to call the guy a premier with no oversight. So what is Ansel Dennis talking about? And in any case, who is he to bring in that nonsense to? The people of Tobago cannot go with that nonsense. Any one of them, PNM, anybody else. That's the advantage this group has. If they really understand what I'm talking about, they'll set a new marker down to move the agenda in Tobago forward, politically and economically. And my hope is, I'm not sure, because these are young people, it's not easy to engage with them. But my hope is they're smart enough to call the rest of us into a real conversation. To move, this is a fork in the road for Tobago and for the country. To take the right road rather than keep going down that wrong road. That's what this is.
Gentlemen,
The young ones would not be able to move forward without the support of those who have walked before them, like you, Doctor. They will continue to need your guidance and support and advice to assist them with their own ideas, to shape it into what they would want to do and see for the people of Tobago and move them forward. I heard our producer saying something.
yes, we got to shut down the program right now. This is as far as we can go for today.
All right. Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Dr. James, thank you for your presence and for your warmth and for being so clear and crystal clear in terms of your thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Farid.
Yes.
All right,
I'd also like to thank him for always being so candid
Yes.
on matters. And I appreciate that. And to me, that is what would help the people of Trinidad and Tobago to expand their understanding and so on. So I want to thank the doctor for coming on again today and continuing to do just that. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Farid. And thank you, Farid, for bringing on the doctor today.
Yes.
Great job. Yeah.
Thank
Until
you,
next week,
gentlemen.
thank you, Doc. Thank you,
care.
Farid. Daddy Mac, get to your next place that you have to go to safely.
Yes. Okay.
right.
Thank you, sir.
Blessings, everyone.
Yes.
Power 102 Digital. Streaming 24/7.